So, a lot of our traditions and a lot of what we see in American history comes from England because we were, of course, colonized mainly by England and we considered ourselves English citizens. Even today, if you take a look at the original 13 colonies, you can see how closely tied we were to England. Just even in the states' names, Georgia was named after King George II of England. North and South Carolina was named after King Charles I of England. Virginia, named after the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth I. You can think of some towns. Jamestown, named after King James. Charleston, named after King Charles. Maryland was named after Queen Henrietta Maria, wife of King Charles of England. We know that the colonists considered themselves to be English citizens, even though there was this big ocean between them and they were governing themselves in their day to day lives. They still considered themselves a part of England. Today, we're going to look at what that meant. Like, what did it mean to be English? What did they believe in? We're going to look at the Magna Carta. We're going to look at the English Bill of Rights. And we're going to look at how these things are going to then, when we leave England, influence the creation of our own government because we had these traditions. So, how that influenced the American Constitution, the American Bill of Rights. We're going to look at important Englishmen like John Locke and what these Englishmen said that influenced American writers when we decide to leave England. So, we need to know what it meant to be English. We are familiar with the idea of kings and queens, but England was actually not a monarchy at this time. It was a constitutional monarchy. And a constitutional monarchy means that the power of the king and the queen were limited by a constitution. And that constitution is the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was signed because King James went to war. He started taxing the citizens to pay for this war. And we're going to see again and again, don't tax the citizens. They don't like it and they'll revolt. And that's what they did. And they went to King James and they said, listen, if you want to avoid a civil war, you need to sign this constitution. You need to sign the Magna Carta. So he signs it. So what's in it? It's really important because the Magna Carta is the first time we see the idea of rule of law. You need to know what the rule of law is. It's that everyone, even the king, is subject to the law. Because remember before, in a monarchy, the king could tax if he wanted to, he could kill people if he wanted to, he could take your property if he wanted to. He was king. If he wanted everyone to be Catholic, everyone became Catholic. So this was really important. Suddenly we have this idea that the king has to follow the law too. And that's really important, and he has to follow the Magna Carta. So it's going to severely limit the power of the king. He can't raise taxes without asking Parliament. So that's another thing that the Magna Carta does. It establishes a Parliament. So you have a due process. You have a way to do things. If the king wants to raise taxes, he has to work with Parliament, and then Parliament, which is elected by the people, has to say, okay, we agree to raise taxes because of this. There's suddenly a trial by one's peers. You can't just throw people into the Tower of London, and you have a right to property. The king can't just say, oh, you have a nice piece of property, I think I want to build a house there. So you can see all of these things that were established in the Magna Carta are things that the colonists believed in and believed that they had the rights to. So when we separate ourselves from England in the American Revolution, we're going to look at these things and use this as a model to create our own. So that's why it's important to know what the Magna Carta was and know what the colonists were familiar with. So if you need to remember bullet points, remember the Magna Carta put limits on the king's power, guaranteed that Englishmen had certain rights that even the king could not take away, established Parliament, and this is when England became a constitutional monarchy. To summarize the Magna Carta. When the colonists left England, crossed the big ocean, they get to America, they're going to realize that yes, we are English citizens and we are subject to the king, but the king can't govern our daily lives, right? Maybe we need a tax to to support an army or a common defense. Things like this that the king can't get involved in. So they have to establish their own form of governments, and they immediately start establishing their own governments, the first being the Virginia House of Burgess, right? It's the first popularly elected legislature in the New World. What's it modeled after? Great Britain's Parliament. But this is the first time they get this taste of okay, we govern ourselves, taste of self-government, the king's not too involved. The House of Burgesses is in Jamestown, one of those first colonies. It's Burgess is just the name of an elected representative, so that's how it gets its name. And they're going to pull people from the surrounding plantations and they're going to elect them and they're going to come together to make community decisions. Again, not directly underneath that influence of the king. It's important because most of the founding fathers, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, those people that we think of as the creators of American government, served in the House of Burgess. So they knew what elected parliaments looked like. They had served in one in Virginia. Another first taste of early government, it's going to be the Mayflower Compact. Now, the Puritans set off on a journey across the ocean. They get blown off course and then land in an area that they're not actually technically under the king's power. They weren't given this land by the king. And so they realize, okay, we have to make sure that everyone on the ships realizes there is a rule of law. We are following certain guidelines. And so they sign the Mayflower Compact before they even get off the ship. And it is the first sort of written laws of the New World, and it outlines what the colonists are going to do once they get there. And it aligns everyone for mutual protection to make sure that they can get along and work together in this new world. When we create the Constitution 150 years later, they're going to look at the Mayflower Compact and what it did. So Massachusetts Bay is another early colony that has this taste of freedom and self-government. And it involved the church, because again, remember the New England colonies, the northern colonies, they were very religious, and they wanted to keep that religion primary focus. So they would elect male members, but you had to be a member of the church, and they'd have town meetings, small governments, and these small governments would spread. But again, it was local, and it was very effective. And these assemblies, these local elected assemblies through the church, had the power to tax. Again, it wasn't the king taxing them, the king coming saying everybody has to pay so-and-so on your land and everybody has to pay so-and-so on your paper, blah, blah, blah. No, the local assemblies, local parliaments did that. They still thought of themselves as Englishmen. They still followed the king's law, but they're doing the local government themselves. So let's look at another English document that the colonists would have been very familiar with, and that would have been the English Bill of Rights. It's going to say that Parliament has all the power. The king doesn't have all the power anymore. King and queen can't tax or pass laws over Parliament. There's going to be no standing army. There's going to be free elections, freedom of speech, freedom to bear arms, no excessive bail or cruel or unusual punishment. Don't get confused, this is the English Bill of Rights. Because look at our American Bill of Rights. When we separate from England, we create our own Bill of Rights. Look what our Bill of Rights says. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting the free speech exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for redress of grievances. What? So similar. So again, we see how much influence England is going to have even after we separate from them. A very important philosopher who you need to know his ideas is John Locke. And John Locke had two ideas. The idea of natural rights and the social contract. Natural rights, he said, was things that you are born with. So when you come into this world, there are things that you just naturally have. And that, according to Locke, was life, liberty, and property. So if you're born, that only can be taken away from you, right? It's not something you earn as you progress through life. You can't further life. You're just born with it. And he also said that you're born with liberty, that you're just born with this ability to live freely, and that government only limits that, right? He also believed in you have the right to property. England is and was small. There's only a certain amount of land there. So if you're born into a family that has land, and that's yours, and that can't be taken away from you. So it's very important to note that John Locke was the first one to come up with this idea of you're born with certain rights and they can't be taken away. Second thing that John Locke believed in was something called the social contract. And the social contract said that government is a contract between people. That the king is not just born and thus he is going to rule you. That the people actually keep that king or keep that government in power. And if the people don't agree with what that person or what that government is doing, they can revolt and overthrow that government, right? And we see that in when King James started taxing the people revolted and made him sign the Magna Carta. It's the people that support the government, not the other way around. So we've learned about natural rights and the social contract, but they really come into play when Thomas Jefferson goes to write the Declaration of Independence. When he goes to write the Declaration of Independence, he's going to look back to John Locke's ideas of life and liberty and the consent of the governed. And this is what he writes. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So here we can see the idea of natural rights when he writes that we are entitled to life and liberty and happiness. And we can see the ideas of the social contract when he says governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from who? From the consent of the governed, or from the people. So Thomas Jefferson looks to John Locke to write the Declaration of Independence. So all of these ideas from the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights and John Locke, we are familiar with as colonists, but we still consider ourselves to be English citizens. But why is this working? Like, why is the colonists allowed this freedom to have their own assemblies and do all these things? Well, it's because England at this time was involved in something called salutary neglect, and basically it meant that England didn't want to get too involved. The situation was working. The colonies were growing things like tobacco and cotton. They may be mining important things like iron, and they were shipping it back to England, and England was using them and manufacturing them. And so the system was working. There was a huge distance. England didn't really want to send people over to govern the colonies. They were doing an okay job by themselves, so England was okay with just leaving them alone and letting them govern themselves. But that's going to change. England's going to go to war. This war is called the 7 Years' War or the French and Indian War. Same war, just two different names. And England is so much in debt that it has to abandon this idea of salutary neglect and has to go to the colonies and say, hey, guess what? To pay for this war, we have to tax you. Well, suddenly the colonists are like, whoa. We're Englishmen. You can't just come in here and tax us. That's taxation without representation. As Englishmen, we have the right to have a voice, and they don't. They don't have representatives in Parliament. They only have representatives in their local assemblies, right? They don't send someone to England to have a voice in English Parliament. It's all done locally. So they're losing some of these rights. They know that they're guaranteed in the Magna Carta, and they know that they're guaranteed in the English Bill of Rights. And so that's when we start getting this frustration with England as it impresses these taxes upon them. And that's going to lead to the American Revolution, when England begins taxing the colonies, and the colonists say, hey, guess what? You're not treating us as Englishmen. We can do it ourselves.